Hey, welcome. Welcome. It's good to see everyone joining us today to our industry economic update. I cannot wait to hear how the conversation goes because there's so much turmoil out there. And so what does that mean for us? How are we going to cope? We have what's happening in the world, our supply chain, our housing market. And so today we're going to hear from Alan Nevin and then some of our panelists. We may not be able to predict the future, but we can talk about what we know and then use that information to figure out what we should be doing from there. So we're going to start this off with economist Alan Nevin, and he has great background. I've heard him speak many times. He has great background in real estate economics, lending, and market analysis. And so when you're trying to figure out what if a project is possible, Alan can kind of walk you through that whole process. He is a co-founder of firms that bought, built, rehabbed, and operated more than 36 residential and commercial projects in San Diego County. So he knows exactly what it takes to get something done in our world today. So Alan, can you please explain where we are in the world today?
Okay, let's go to the next slide. I call the 12 plagues. The last couple of years, we've had an enormous number of negative things happen economically around the world. And yet, our economy here in the United States has really done amazingly well. Let's look at the next slide. During the COVID years, California's personal income has gone up tremendously. Our wages and salaries have ballooned. The S&P, until very recently, went up very well. Interest rates stayed low. The job openings have just been amazing, more than 11 million job openings in the US. And here in San Diego last year, our home prices went up 18%. So it's tough to have a negative bent on anything when things seem to be going so well here. Let's look at the next slide. So we're going to look at California first. Let's go to the next, if we may. Okay, this past year, California added 869,000 jobs, 1 out of every 7 new jobs created in the United States were in our state of California. Next, please. There's a lot of talk about folks moving out of California. And what we're seeing is that the folks with lesser education and lesser incomes are moving out because they just can't afford to live here. But 60% of the adults moving here have a college degree or higher because we have the jobs that everyone really wants to have. The next slide. We know that last year, more than 50% of the nation's venture capital funding went to our wonderful state of California. On the next slide, the only negative I can find is that cannabis revenues have leveled off, and I thought they'd been continued going up. So we'll have to keep track and take a look at that one again later. Let's take another. Now let's look at our little county here, San Diego, with 3.3 million people. You know, when COVID hit, basically overnight, our unemployment rate went up to 18%. Right now, we're at 2.7, which essentially is no unemployment at all. And frankly, that's the lowest I've seen it in the last 20 years. So we are doing pretty well. Let's look at the next one. This past year in this county, we added 84,000 new jobs. That's pretty impressive. On the next slide, I want to show you that the leisure and hospitality industry, which took the really big hit on jobs in this county, where we went from basically 200,000 jobs to cut in half. And it has come back roaring. By the end of this year, we'll probably be back to where we were pre-COVID. And that's great news for our economy because that creates a lot of jobs. And of course, it shows that the tourists are back, the conventioneers are back, the folks on the cruise ships are coming back. So things are going very well here. On the next slide, we look at venture capital. I've talked about it before, but last year we had an amazing year bringing venture capital here to this county. And what we're seeing on the next slide is that workers in science and engineering occupations per 1,000 workers, we are number 2 in the nation, second only to Santa Clara County, San Jose. We are doing incredibly well in terms of bringing the kind of jobs here that it takes to afford the kind of housing that we have. Next slide, please. The life sciences business here has been remarkably good. In the last 2 quarters, we signed leases on just these 6 firms for over 1.7 million square feet. If you've been on the 56 at the northeast corner, 56 in Carmel Valley Road, there are 2 beautiful new office buildings there with 630,000 square feet. And Neuroprene came in and leased the entire project. So we have an amazing amount of high paying firms that are coming to our county. And that's very good for us. Let's look on the next slide. I wanted to hit downtown for just a second because downtown office space has really not done well at all. The unemployment rate, the vacancy rate downtown is close to 20%. But what's happening right now is that we have an enormous amount of space that's being developed aimed at the life science market. And the campus at Horton, formerly Horton Plaza, if you go by and you look at what was the Nordstrom store, it's now a 10-story high-rise that is designed for laboratory space. Go down toward the bay and take a look at what IQ HQ is building, more than 1 million square feet of life sciences space. It's right next to the where the Navy just built their headquarters. And there's more coming yet. So we hope that they're going to find the lessees to help downtown office space and employment to come back to life. Let's look at the next one. And we talk about downtown development. I don't know if you've been there lately, but right now there are like 2,500 units under construction and more than 12,000 units in planning. Downtown is going through an enormous amount of development, and they are renting those spaces and they're renting the apartments, and they're typically going for $3.50 to $4 a square foot, which is fairly heady pricing, but they're getting it and they're filling up. Let's go to the next one. So let's talk real estate in San Diego in terms of the housing market. The closed sales dropped almost 20% in the last year. We had really been on a pretty good roll for basically 3 or 4 years. On the next slide, you can see what has happened is that the listings have dropped. People have held back from listing their homes because if they were go to a new one, they'd have to pay 5% interest, and they're not too interested in that. So I'm anticipating that we're going to have a continual softness of the resale market. And that has a relatively small effect on the new home market, because it appears to me, at least, that the demand for new housing continues unabated. And as usual, we're not building enough to take care of demand. And in 2022, I think we will continue to be undersupplied all over the county. And as usual, we will have every morning more than 70,000 cars coming down the 15 to jobs here in San Diego, because people can only afford to live in Riverside. And there's really no reason to believe that our home prices are going to go down. They will continue to go up, and we will continue to do very well during certainly the balance of 2022. And then everyone wants to know, are we going to have a recession? And the answer is, we're going to have a little softening of the economy, but I don't see a recession in our near-term future. That's about it for me.
All right. Okay, we know a little bit now, huh? And how we're going to do that. So we have some panelists that we're going to hear from in a second. If you have any questions, put them in the chat, and we'll get to them as we move along. So I want to introduce Halle Richardson. She is the Vice President of HomeFed Corporation. She's been with the company since 1996, and she's responsible for the strategic development and implementation of all marketing and communications for the company's master plan communities, which includes from beginning to end, getting those through the process until families are actually moving in, which has got to be the best day of anybody's life, is when you work so hard to get a development through the process and then you see the families moving into those homes. So Halle, some feedback on Alan's presentation?
Yeah, good morning, Lori. Alan, thank you very much. Oops, I'm hearing an echo, and I don't think it's on my side. There, I think we got it away. Can you hear me okay now?
Now we can.
Okay, great. Alan, thank you for the comments. Always encouraging to get some feedback to sort of backfill some of the things you're seeing on site. And it is an exciting time. Actually, we're having the first round of our move-ins in our new master plan in Costa Vera. So the timing is exactly consistent with what you're saying, Lori, is getting to watch those families moving in is really fun right now. I gotta say, I'm encouraged, and in full candor, it's helpful, because I was a little bit thrown by the jump in interest rates. I shouldn't have been. It was all over the news, and certainly there's been discussion that the Fed is going to increase rates to try to hedge inflation. But even with that preemptive notice, I don't think I quite expected to see it jump as quickly as it did. And so I was a little bit nervous talking to our builders to see, how it's impacting them, what's happening with home sales, and what's going on. I know we'll get into it later on with a few questions, but I think it's really encouraging to get Alan's news and his take on this. As it relates to the labor force, so I jotted a couple of notes here in context of what he was talking about. Always a little bit confused as to where these people are, because I trust the numbers. I know he's right, and I see that they're back, but I don't know where they're hiding, because I'm still going into, restaurants and retail shops, and it seems like everywhere you go, people have signs up that say, please be patient with us. We're, challenged, and we have, few workers, and we're trying to get through it. So clearly the numbers are there in support of what Alan is saying, but it'll be interesting as we get a little bit further into this to understand what the nuance is in terms of the redistribution. Where are these people going? What kinds of jobs are they adjusting to? And there was an interesting example. I think there's acronyms that are used for online positions now, and the younger generation is so used to the acronyms in terms of, what they mean, what an online position, an online, sort of full remote position is. And for someone like me, it takes me a little bit of time. I'm spending some time on Google trying to figure out, like, what are these positions that everyone is going to? But so many of them are full remote positions. And I think that's what's happening. They're in the workforce, they're there, they're doing their part, they're contributing to the economy, but they just may not be in the most, visible locations that we were used to seeing them in before. So good to see that that's happening, and that workforce is strong. We certainly see it. And the strength there is in the wage appreciation is super helpful because it's supporting the price appreciation that we need in terms of, hedging against material expenses, labor shortages, all the things that are causing our pricing to go up. Thankfully, that strong labor market and the wage appreciation that Alan was talking about is helping to support and keep responsive to some of these challenges that we're having. And as hard as we can, we work to try to keep pricing where it's fair, but there's times that you just have to be responsive to these constraints, and thank God the economy is helping to hedge against some of that. I couldn't have been happier, Alan, to hear you talk about the fact that 60% of the adults moving into California are educated. A number of reasons. Certainly that's tied very much to the dollars you're talking about as it relates to venture capital coming here and new positions in engineering and sciences. Those are undoubtedly what we're seeing. But as it relates to having a degree when they come in, that's encouraging, because candidly, on the flip side of that, watching what's happening with education, our public school system is really challenged to be able to even accommodate the students that we have here in the state. I know that the funding model has changed a lot, so we're seeing a lot of students, local students, that we'd love to be able to educate here and keep here because their families are here and they're deep rooted here. They're having to go to other locations and they're turned away from the public school program. So it's nice to hear that they're coming in with a degree, because I'm not sure we're doing quite as effective of a job of offering them degrees locally if they're growing up here. And our system is sort of dependent on the higher tuitions that are coming from out of state and international. And as I said, let's see, tying into your mention about venture capital, blows my mind. I mean, I think you said north of 50% of the nation's venture capital came to California. We certainly saw that here. And I think that is in large part what's driving the need for the life sciences downtown. All that construction that you're seeing is in response to the venture capital coming in and fueling these really innovative companies and giving them an opportunity to invest in, leases and space and grow their workforce. I don't know, with interest rates growing, it's hard to imagine that kind of, flood of capital is going to be perpetual. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that they're doing a really good job of being, selective. Those investors hopefully are doing a good job picking the companies they're seeding that money into, so that big time funding is going to, pay off, that these companies are going to perpetuate more jobs that we can rely on going forward. Let's see, one last point, and then I'll pass it on to the next person. Total surprise to me about the cannabis revenue. So I think you made a convert of me. As a parent, I might have had some resistance to that industry, I'll admit. And now you've got me thinking in a completely different direction. I'm wondering if there's maybe any other vices out there that we can recruit to help us pay off some of these regulatory costs that are usually on the back of development. Who knows? Maybe we need to be thinking creatively about how to fund some of that. Thank you. Thanks, Alan. Appreciate the update. It's really helpful.
An interesting concept about how to help us make housing more affordable. And we certainly bring up that the most compelling challenge that we have, we all see, now hiring, but those are predominantly in the lower wage areas. And so our housing market is not healthy to be able to support families not having to drive to Menifee or Temecula to work in restaurants or whatever. So I think that's one of our most compelling challenges that we need to deal with in San Diego, and we spend a good deal of time on that. We have Eric Aguilar here as well, and he owns Econ Construction. Great branding, good job on that, Eric. It's a full service for commercial and residential. So you cover both the commercial and the residential side. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I was really impressed by the presentation, Alan. It's good to confirm what everyone's been talking about in our space. And, I found that it was really interesting, the vacancies in downtown. And it just makes me think if we're going to start seeing some repositioning of these commercial spaces into multifamily units over the next few years, being that the vacancies are so high. And another thing was seeing that there's not enough units in San Diego built for multifamily apartments. So I'm really excited to take part in that and chase projects as they come out. Yeah, that's pretty much the takeaway I got from Alan. I really appreciate the presentation and all the data. I found it very interesting that a lot of biotech has chosen San Diego to be the center of it all. And yeah, thank you very much for the presentation.
You bring up, Eric, the idea of what's happening in downtown, and that's almost 5 million square feet of office space. You know, how many houses do we need to have to support that? Because I always see elected officials are great on voting for more jobs, but they hesitate to vote on the housing. If you have a job, there's a good family, there's somebody working at that job, they need to live somewhere. And we don't quite get that into balance. So 5 million square feet of office space or workspace, how many houses will we actually need to build? And is 21,000 even close to the need? So next we have Brooke Velasquez, and she has over 15 years in the staffing world. If you need somebody, she can find the exact right person that you need. And interesting, we'll get to hear a little bit about what you've seen in history and how is it going to help us predict the future. So we'll have some questions in a few minutes, but just want to get a little bit of your feedback on just the whole economic outlook.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think the biggest takeaway that I think we can look at is, where did the employees go? Like Kale was saying, is I think part of the concern is that we're getting all these educated people into California. And a lot of our jobs in our industry, we are more blue collar. We're looking for those people that want to be out in the sun, that want to get their hands dirty. And it's about creating an appeal for our industry that isn't necessarily out there right now. When you can go to McDonald's or a fast food restaurant and be in your air conditioning and get paid the same or more than you can to do labor out on a construction site, it makes it really tough to appeal to those types of people. So being in staffing as long as I had, this is the toughest time it's actually 18 years that I've been in the business to attract those people. So it's making your companies more attractive, showing growth patterns, showing that you're not going to be stuck as a laborer if you're starting as a laborer, that you can grow to be a foreman, an assistant, and a super, that you can change your life and your family's life, that you can buy a house someday, that you're not going to be stuck like you might in a fast food sector, that there's really just more appeal there, and showing people they don't have to get that college degree to be in our business. And it actually, you can start off higher, you can grow further. And I think a key too is finding the overlooked employees. Sometimes we look so much at the hard skills that people need. They need to know how to be a carpenter. They need to at least have a year of experience. They need specific software knowledge. But I think a lot of people get overlooked. I have a customer that was looking for somebody to do accounting in their construction firm and basic construction admin. Originally, they wanted somebody with experience. I ended up finding somebody that had been a translator for 8 years, Arabic translator. She looked nothing like what they wanted, but I was able to relate what her skills and her repertoire was into what they were looking for. We did some testing to show she had similar skill sets, and now they're super excited to bring her on because she can now relate and translate those skills versus having to keep looking for somebody that already has those skills, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And so,
sorry, go ahead.
And other comments? Okay, all right, let's move on and see how I want to have more of a conversation amongst us all. We have some questions and might direct them to some individuals and get the conversation started. Like the first one, we hear so much about supply chain issues. And Alan, I don't think you dealt with that too much, and you may have something that you could add to this piece of the conversation. But Eric, you're out in the field and you're trying to get a job done for a builder or you get something built. How are you adapting your time schedules to supply chain issues? And what kinds of materials are affected by supply chain challenges?
Yeah, great question. So far we found that it's more about adapting our procurement methods versus facing supply chain issues. We believe that there's ways to stay out in front of it. One of those is, we do 90% buyout in 90 days or less when a project starts. With that comes procurement of the materials so we can get on site as soon as possible. From a construction standpoint, we fast track build all of our parking structures to be able to store all the materials on site so we can control the workflow and ensure that we have all the finished materials on site.
Did you have to change to do that? Is that you've changed how you build things to make sure that that was, or you just realized you had an asset?
Yeah, I mean, 2 to 3 years ago, we weren't really so worried about the materials, but now that it's become a procurement world, we've shifted our platform to create storage immediately on job sites, so we could buy, procure, and store all the materials on site, so we don't have workflow issues. And it's the contractors that aren't doing that now are having those hard conversations because lead times right now are drastically different from 2 to 3 years ago. So.
And then how about the cost of materials over the last couple of years?
Yeah, we've seen about a 20 to 30% increase. As anything with a chip or anything that's manufactured overseas, we're having to get out in front. But as far as commodity items, wood, steel, we've been able to locate it, obviously price aside. And we haven't seen any challenges with that, at least on our multifamily projects.
Hey, Eric, I'm curious, one of the things I'm hearing anecdotally, and I'm just wondering if you've seen any of this. Sounds like you guys are well ahead of it, but I'm, reminded of what happened at the very beginning of COVID when people got nervous about toilet paper and started sort of buying and hoarding toilet paper, stockpiling it. And, of course I wasn't one of those people at all, but I wonder, I'm hearing some of the same thing with some of the equipment that we need for these sites, electrical panels being in very, very high demand, recognize that people are maybe purchasing ahead with the idea that, okay, let me make sure to get ahead of this. Do you think there's some sort of future kind of wall coming when new projects are coming online, haven't necessarily planned as well as you are? Or should they be concerned that they're going to probably run into something ahead?
Yeah, I mean, when you get a project brought to you and it's already fully approved and they're ready to put a shovel in the ground, you do run across those procurement items that have long lead times. I mean, I think switch gears are out 12 months right now on bigger size gears, but it's really important that general contractors, we get involved in pre-construction so we can analyze and put all that stuff on the table in front of our clients, so they're aware of the costs that they're going to incur, and if there's opportunities to buy all that ahead of time. And that's been the path to our success. And we try to educate people and our subs to bring everything to the table immediately during those first 90 days so we can assure that our job gets completed on time each time. So
Alan, any other comments on supply chain? I hear recently that President Biden is not going to help with the lumber tariffs, which we believe would be very helpful. Lumber costs have skyrocketed in the last few years, and we talk about a housing crisis, but we're not doing anything to help lower the prices. But any thoughts from you? And you're muted. All right, maybe he can't hear us either. Right?
I don't know if Eric
All right.
could hear
All right.
that was directed to him.
Yeah, well, let's we can continue on. And Brooke, we're talking about materials, and then we also have the labor shortage. And so what are you seeing out there? You talked about that a little bit, but what are you seeing? What kind of benefits are most attractive to, I mean, if you get an employee, how do you retain them, and how do you find more employees? So what are your observations?
Yeah, the companies that I find that are being most attractive right now are companies that aren't going with a one size fits all type benefit package. They're more elective, so they have more options for benefits. So they're able to make it more of a communication with their employees versus these are the benefits, take it or leave it. and getting creative with the benefits. Yes, medicals is of course still super crucial, having at medical package, but some things like during the wildfires, offering air purifiers, with the pandemic, giving masks, giving sanitizer, like certain simple things that we sometimes overlook are benefits that show the employees that you care. And the more that we can tailor those benefits to the employees. If it's a younger workforce, they might not be caring so much about retirement. I know that's right now, and they should, but offering them even retirement planners, people that can help them discover what's coming next, is also beneficial. But it's really about having that conversation and finding out what the employees want and caring what they want.
And Eric, what are you finding that works? I mean, Brooke talked about how it is. How compelling of a discussion do we have to say that construction is a great living? You can provide for your family. Like Brooke said, you might eventually be able to buy a home, but working outside, changing jobs, making sure you have constant work can be stressful for a family, and not having air conditioning now that we're into the summertime. So what are you finding works?
Yeah, I mean, we create a culture within our organization, and we really, shed light on all of our personnel, so they could, they feel like they're part of the plan. And we continue to do team building groups within our organization. It's tough out there. There's a lot of, there's a shortage in good talent out there, and in order to retain our talent, we've found that having team building and just letting employees fly and not clipping their wings has been very successful for us. And we've continued to empower our employees through social media, spotlighting them, going to the jobs, honoring them, and in addition to our subs, hosting monthly barbecues to show that we care. When we receive payments, we reach out to all of our subs, just let them know that we're thankful. And it's more of a community thing, and the bonding right now that's allowed us to retain a lot of our employees, and it's been very good for us.
In some ways, creating a family, it's like their social network too. So if you actually leave that job and do something else, you're leaving the people that you socialize with or your kids know and stuff. So that probably is pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's been very effective for us during these times.
I love that. The company culture that you create is huge. And I love what you're saying as far as you vary up the way you recognize people too. Companies that get too much into a same pattern, they only send an email or they only post on social media. It almost becomes background noise versus varying it up. Actually spotlight the employees that you're trying to recognize and gives them the recognition they deserve.
And what about providing additional education, more training, so that they can move forward in their work?
Yeah, sure. We've implemented a lot of technology into our company, and we believe we're a smart contractor. We run the full Procore platform, and we're constantly training our employees to be more of a hybrid worker versus one type of job. So it allows them to see that there is no top here, that they want to be at the top, that there's a path to it. We really put a lot of emphasis on that, and we meet quite often with our employees, so we know the pulse of how everyone's going, and if there's any opportunities, we're first to bring that up within our organization before we go hire. And it's been really good. The company culture is everything, and just spotlighting individuals within the organization, and versus it just being me as the owner. I come to work every day for my people. So
they still say that our industry uses the least technology of any industry. So if you're embracing it and bringing it on, I think that in order to get some cost savings, we're going to have to incorporate more technology. So you'll be way ahead of the game, and anybody that's working for you will have the skills as well.
Yeah, streamlining is everything right now. So finding ways to streamline processes, it helps, gets projects done on time, and keeps our backlog nice when we're implementing technology stuff. So.
And Eric, and just to jump in for a second, Lori, and not to interrupt, but what I really liked about what you said, I think, is to use the term, sort of training people to be a bit of a hybrid, that they can kind of transition from one position to another. I think that goes a long way in trying to keep, especially younger workers' interest, to give them a little bit of exposure to the various ranges of career opportunities, because they don't know exactly what they're doing when they get there, right? They don't have a clear picture of exactly what they want to do. I've got 2 young boys that are coming through high school, and they're constantly asked every day, what is it that you want to do when you grow up? And, if they're having really honest conversations, they're still mulling it over. Most adults are still mulling it over, right? So to give them an opportunity to have a little bit of exposure to a range of opportunities, I think keeps them engaged and keeps them from getting kind of overwhelmed by, oh my God, I'm doing this. I'm not necessarily going to be digging ditches for the rest of my life. That can be overwhelming. But the idea that, hey, you pay some dues in this respect, there's things that you learn in this, in this area, you can transfer that knowledge base over to something else. So I think it goes a long way to take the approach that you can, kind of cross-train employees to be responsive. That's really helpful.
Here's another quick question by one of our participants is, how can we get venture capital to invest into the lower level job marketing? We are not going to have the workforce to continue to build over the next 20 years if we do not invest into supporting the blue collar job. And that goes back to the challenge that we have. If we may be so proud of all the high wages and high, great jobs that we have, high skilled jobs, but there's still a whole cadre of employees that make middle incomes, support the support team, and they should be able to live inside our communities. They should not have to drive forever. It's just not right. So, interesting. Maybe we could throw that to Alan and see how do we get venture capital into helping support blue collar efforts. You're muted. So how do we unmute you? Alan, you're muted. There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
The reality is that we're just an expensive place to live, and that's not going to change. So I think one of the things we have to do is to cut a deal with Mexico to allow their workers to get up here easier than they can right now. And they are basically our entry-level workforce, and they have been for decades. And they've just been shut out of the picture just a relatively few years. And we're certainly not the only county that's feeling the shortage of entry-level labor. There has to be a substantial amount of that just for all the jobs that our kids don't want to take. So it's very difficult. And can we do moderate priced housing? The answer is we can make a lot more headway than we have. I have been speaking on the issue of ground leases because the cities and the county have hundreds of acres that they own that they could put out on ground leases to developers and literally put out very moderate priced both sale and rental housing.
Exactly, and make that the land price affordable, right? It's a lease that's we put it into a factor that says the county and the cities will make some lease money, but not the maximum revenue that. We did a paper a couple of years ago showing you could do ground leases for, let's say, do townhomes on a ground lease, and the city puts the land in at a zero base, and also holds down their fees, and then ultimately
when the buyer of that home sells the home, the city gets the land price back at that point in time. And the city of San Diego has something on the order of 200 acres that we identified that could do that. And incidentally, there's no reason why we shouldn't be talking to the feds, because they control, obviously, an enormous amount of land here. Miramar alone is 23,000 acres. And if we could do a ground lease on a small part of that, we could create moderate price, both sale and rental housing.
Well, you brought up another issue too, that the military is expanding their operations in San Diego and have a tremendous demand for housing, and they don't pay the super high wages. And so if they could even use some of their land to help mitigate that need would be helpful. So very challenging. Look, we've turned to begun to discuss dollars. And so how are interest rates impacting your business now? And is it the same for all of your product segments, Holly? I mean, you build a wide variety. What happens?
Yeah, so I think interest rates affect us in a number of ways. I think just to break it down kind of by the segment, as it relates to the work we do in entitlement, planning, land development, we're using our own equity there. So interest rates aren't quite impacting that component of our business. We feel very strongly about the fundamentals, especially in our San Diego market. You heard
that's unusual, right? Not many builders use their own equity.
That's not as common, right? That's not as common. We've been fortunate there. That was really helpful to us during the last downturn, being able to continue to move forward with our project entitlements and take advantage of the time during the 2008 and forward time frame was really helpful to us. And so that piece is not quite so dependent on interest rate. We certainly were pained by, the regulatory costs, the entitlement and the processing delays, but candidly, we're not being singled out as it relates to that. So anybody that's on this call is sort of, nodding their head, they're all dealing with those same kinds of things. So as far as the entitlement planning component, we're moving forward as fast as we can to bring lots to market, and we'll continue to do that. There's another important component of our business that is more impacted is the multifamily rental construction component. So we have a significant pipeline, just shy of about 30 locations that we plan to do apartments and build to rent product over the course of the next 10 years. And you can't, overlook the higher cost of borrowing as it relates to those kinds of projects. Fortunately, so far, we've had the advantage that, the appreciation in the rents has helped to offset those higher costs, those higher borrowing costs, and those projects, those performers are still penciling. And so we're moving forward on all of those. Candidly, when it takes 3-4 years to do one, you can't just stop every time there's a rate uncertainties. So the higher interest rates are not derailing that effort. We're moving fast as hard as we can, and as long as supply is still constrained the way that it is, we won't slow down in that respect. And I talked to Steve Levinson. He's in charge of the vertical development for us, and he says as fast as he can fill out loan applications, the lenders are still making loans. Now, this rate change is relatively new, but historically speaking, he's done, development in any range of interest rate environments. And so he's not particularly burdened at this point with it. I think, Lori, your point about product segments, so that speaks more to what our builders are experiencing, our guest builders within our master plan communities. And we, ear to the ground, sort of minute by minute, to kind of keep an eye on what's going on there. But so far, over the past number of weeks, sort of watch what's happened in this very sort of shifting environment. The higher end product really hasn't had any kind of adjustment. People are still qualifying those dynamics that Alan spoke about before. Wage growth is there. A lot of those people that are paying those prices have seen, wonderful appreciation in their stock portfolios, their other investment portfolios. Maybe they're getting some, stock payouts that are helping them. And so that interest rate isn't causing them to rethink it. Candidly, they battled hard enough to get into a position to get one of those units. And as they're getting, closer to closing on those lots, the adjustment in the interest rate isn't causing them to scare. They're being more cautious, and we're watching that because, at some point the push on the rates, in addition to what we've seen happen with price appreciation, is going to make affordability even more challenging, as though that's even an option. But that is going to happen, and we're being careful of it. But so far, no derailment there. A little bit more nervousness on the part of a buyer that's, sort of scraped it together to get into the entry level price point. And in those cases, any kind of nervousness is not just because of their election, but we've seen one or two of those so far where they haven't qualified any longer at the adjusted rate, but it's been very minimal. They've had options to be able to adjust to. I think the mortgage industry is trying to respond as quickly as possible. They're being a little more creative. There's adjustable rate mortgages that are, already showing signs of helping them get through kind of that affordability pinch. And then we have a lot of VA buyers too, and the VA loans are not, quite as steep as what we're seeing in the open markets, right? You can still get a high 4% rate in the VA loan, and that's a notable part of our buyer base, especially in Chula Vista. So we've been okay there. And we talked to our builders about the depth of their interest list, and it's still deep. It's not quite as deep as it was. It's not, there's still a limit to affordability. And so we are pushing a core component of who was on that interest list out, not by choice, right? Not by election, but just by qualification. But there's still so much demand, and it's so challenging to bring new product to market that supply demand balance is still heavily weighted toward our builders there.
You certainly see that demand when we hear about 100 unit brand new, 100 units, and there's 1,500 on the interest list.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's a very different market. Last year, I guess I was, 2001, certainly, I used to sort of say it in a bit of jest, but it's the first time ever in my career where I spent more money trying to keep people from getting on the site than attracting them to the site, right? So, I mean, that's where the demand was, is that people were literally trying to, push past barriers to try to get in and get a peek at what was going on. And so that was a unique position to be in. The project's open now, so that's not the case, but you watch all the constraints that people are dealing with. If there's resistance, or if there's kind of hesitation, it's mostly because the buyers are just so desperate to kind of know where they are in the interest list, and our builders have so much demand that it's difficult to manage staff in order to be able to be as responsive as they used to be. That can create some challenges, and we're working really hard to help them with that that sort of client management there. And then the thing to remember about interest rates is that it's not like every single buyer that's coming into the market is comparing a 3% rate to a 6% rate, right? You've got new cohorts of buyers coming through all the time. So depending on when you enter into the market, you're not going, oh, well, if I had purchased 2 years ago or a year ago, I would have had this rate. I mean, maybe you're considering it, but you're not basing your willingness to move forward on that. A lot of these buyers just need a home. They need a place for their family. And so they're going to be creative about how they can stretch, what they can give up, where they're going to compromise, so that the interest rate can just be one piece of the deciding factor, as opposed to the driving force between how they're making their decisions. So we're not seeing a big fallout yet. So far, the fundamentals are driving us.
Certainly, you're right about it. I mean, I need a house, so I need to figure out how to buy a house. And if I can get into a house, I'm going to do that. And certainly, historically, we've always thought a 5% interest rate is a great rate. I mean, the first home that I bought, the interest rate was 21%. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
That's just outrageous. But yeah, so your goal is to get into the house.
Yeah.
So, okay, what type of house? So we've talked about the housing type in the segment of whether they're affordable and whether the buyers can get into them. But are you seeing a change in what people want in a home? Now, I believe that we should be building a lot more 1,100 square foot homes so that we could get some more entry level, but those don't seem to be, for some reason, developers find those difficult to build in that case. But what is the buyer asking for?
I mean, there's huge demand for anything that they can afford, if we're being really honest. I mean, you know, a roof and a mortgage that's acceptable is sort of the easy answer there. But if we're talking about, you know, for the context of buyer preferences, what they're looking for, what they're talking about a little bit more openly is candidly very reflective of what we've seen during COVID, right? So, you know, I was just up at PCBC, and by the way, the talent that was behind, there's a study that came out called the America at Home study. And that was our local, you know, San Diego and SoCal talent that led that study. It's a national study that was done. So the names are probably familiar to a lot of people who are checked in, you know, Terry with TST Inc. and Nancy Dolan Group, Nancy Keenan, by the way, who got inducted into the California Builders Hall of Fame. It was wonderful to see that. And Belinda Sword, who's very involved here locally in San Diego. They really led the drive for a survey to help us understand what is it that people are looking for. And by the way, not just looking for, but willing to pay for. So that was pretty much right on target with what we're seeing in our master plan communities. The conversation is very much about, you know, COVID responsive things. How do I create spaces that accommodate and can be kind of convertible, flexible, responsive to a changing need for how I use my house? You know, can I say, you know, put in a door on what might have been an open office so that it, you know, offers a little bit of a quieter environment where, you know, every time my kids run in and out of the front door, I'm not interrupted during a Zoom call? Or can I find
The kids don't run behind you in the Zoom call.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And, you know, can we think about ways where we can transform spaces? Is there a way to, you know, kind of build sort of a unit that kind of quickly can be hidden away from public traffic if I want to use it for, you know, a couple of pieces of gym equipment, but then when I've got guests over, you know, I've got something that can kind of hide in front of it, so that space does double duty. You know, what kinds of, you know, little nooks do I have that are available in garages where I could steal away? It's a way to be able to kind of get more, kind of double duty for the same spaces that you had before. Not specifically a lot of people asking for more space, just sort of smarter space. And if I'm being really candid, you know, we've got, our builders are doing a great job. Southern California is sort of recognized to be one of the more innovative, you know, leaders for how they plan out their spaces. So there hasn't been a lot of asks. There hasn't been any resistance to the floor plans that we're seeing. Mostly people are just really excited to be able to access the floor plans, right? To get past the interest list and get into them. But there are little triggers that make one more interesting than another. Outdoor space and the quick accessibility of that is really helpful. And what we're finding is people are, you know, anything that's sort of, you know, multi-generational or has a bedroom down or a double master or something that allows them to think about, you know, how they might be able to, you know, accommodate either kids that are staying home a little bit longer or an aging parent. These are some of the ways that people are being responsive to the increase in the cost of housing, is they're literally looking for different alternatives collectively within the family, right? If the kids are able to stay home longer, that's a way to accommodate the expensive housing for the collective family, as opposed to that child going out and living on their own separately. Or if they can bring a parent into the home, then that's a reduced overall expense to them. Their house might be a little more expensive, but they're funneling less out and supporting the parents in, say, assisted care for the extra year before it's necessary. So we're finding people trying to be very sort of creative about those kinds of things. Multi-generational housing is definitely something that also helps in the instance where you have to deal with a quarantine kind of situation, right? So if you've got, you know, a guest suite that allows you to close the door and they have an outside access, you know, it's responsive to COVID there. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. You know, the very beginning of something that I hadn't seen as much before is the discussion specifically about gas prices affecting where people are making their choices. So in terms of location, I think, you know, it used to be a different discussion about, well, what do I want to do on the weekends versus how much am I willing to commute during the week? And now that bite is a lot more expensive. So gas prices and really not a lot of people are believing that that's immediately gonna fall. So that's coming up in conversation even more.
It
but
certainly talks about how the problem is exacerbated for the housing challenge in San Diego County when Alan says there's 70,000 people driving from Riverside County because that's where they can afford to live. Now their gas price, paying for gas is more than they ever dreamed it would be. And so then it just brings the problem back into the county of like, okay, we need to do something to get more housing built. So
yeah.
Brooke, when you talk to employees all the time, potential employees, how much of that do you hear is housing is a challenge for them about where the job may be and how far they'd have to drive?
Yeah, housing is always a challenge. And like you guys are saying with the gas prices, it's actually, I've noticed a shift in employees willing to make that drive for the low wages. If they can find the work where they're at, even if it's a little less pay, they'll stay closer to where they are rather than make the commute, because at the end of the day, they end up spending more money on the commute and more time versus before they were able to make more money by making the commute. So it's creating more of a struggle as they're having to travel more.
For sure. Eric, the same challenge for you. You hear from employees, both the challenge of driving in, finding housing.
Yeah, I mean, on our side, we've been really lucky. We've been in North Park, Hillcrest, Bankers Hill for the last 16 years. So a lot of our subs are locals, but we have seen it more recently. We have a couple holes that we're digging right now for projects, and getting calls from our subcontractors telling us that their truckers don't want to come haul dirt because of the gas prices. It's been a new shock to us, and we've been facing those kind of challenges. But other than that, we've been very lucky to say we haven't ran across that. So
I want to remind everyone that we are happy to answer questions. If you want to put them in the chat, we'll get to them. It'd be nice to hear. So a lot of the time that we spend here in the BIA offices is working on the legislative issues, trying to help our policymakers understand that you can say you want housing, but then any regulatory burden you place on a house just makes it cost. Nothing is for free. And so, how do you deal with that? So just want to ask any of our panelists, what legislative issues do you see coming down or hear about that concern you more than anything else?
Laurie, I want to chat about a missing link in our building, and that is the vertical condominium. Because of the 10-year statute of liability, we're not building vertical condos, and we built a lot of them in the early 2000s, and they all wound up in litigation. But we should be building vertical condominiums, typically type 3 or type 1, because the millennial market appreciates the condominium scene, and certainly downtown would welcome the opportunity to buy vertical condos. But like I say, the last condo, affordable, reasonably priced condominium downtown was built in 2007. So we need, I think, to approach our legislature to reduce that 10-year period down to something more reasonable.
Yeah, I agree. And that seems like a simple legislative fix, and for some reason we can't get that done.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Alan. It's been a horrendous constraint, and it's something that's within grasp, it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Lori, I don't know if just to jump in with a concern for us, and it touches a little bit on one of the mentions that Alan made earlier about ground leases, but one of the big challenges for us has to do with the more recent constraints of surplus lands, right? So, very well intentioned, intended to prioritize affordable housing, make sure that some of these government-owned properties, municipal-owned properties were made available for affordable housing projects. But this is, one of those issues where it feels a little bit like the kind of the reference of cart before horse is appropriate here, right? So in order for make something like this work, you've got to deliver a program, but you've got to also accommodate for the housing requirement, or rather the funding requirements of it, right? If you are bringing forward properties and you're constraining them for affordable housing use, but you don't have any solutions for how to, you know, apply infrastructure, broader infrastructure to make the property accessible, then it really just isolates it and hamstrings the project from any kind of development if it's constrained by affordable housing. So we've got to think about how to resolve this. That's definitely an issue that's holding us up in a couple of locations, and certainly we've read about it as it relates to any of the other properties, that the municipalities are trying to make available for development.
Yeah, the practical reality, I mean, theoretically, it sounds like, okay, government has surplus land, it should go to low-income housing, but the more sustainable, viable is to have mixed housing, which is a better neighborhood also. You want to have low, very low, median. You want to mix. That's how we used to grow up. That's how neighborhoods used to be. And so it would be much more environmentally friendly, sustainable, build for better community roots in that. But they're going to have to adjust that somehow so that we get a better balance.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another big concern for us is sort of trying to figure out the way to navigate around VMT and transportation, you know, implications, right? So, you know, what we're seeing is restrictions in housing opportunities at a lot of the locations in the county that were originally planned to host these, but really without the respective kind of adjustments to the mitigation take that was done in these locations. So that's another area of concern. We've got to try to figure out, you know, the idea is protect the land, you know, consider the environment. Certainly, I don't want to dismiss that, you know, everything we can do to find a balance there, but recognizing that housing and humans are part of that environmental concern, you know, anything that we need to be looking at and working a little bit more deliberately with government to figure out how do we offset this, right? If you're going to allocate all the units to, you know, to an infill location, are there practical implications of what that means, and how do we offset, you know, the challenges there? How do we create opportunities for development that is not, you know, overburdening infrastructure in those locations? And so, you know, VMT analysis is definitely something that's on the forefront for us.
It certainly is. I'm trying to help people understand, when you limit our ability to build throughout the region, that's traditionally where you had more single family homes that were more affordable for families. Now you're cutting that out, and we have to have some acknowledgement of that's what we're doing. So I have another question of what's the current legislative definition of affordable housing? And so I would think, you know, affordable housing is something that middle income families could buy, but the technical affordable is very low, is less than 30% of the area median income. Low is 30 to 50, and then it's below 30, then 30 to 50, and then 50 to 80, and then moderate is above 80. And so, and if you're middle income, I think in San Diego County, that income is about $100,000 for a family of four. And a family of four middle income can't really buy anything in this region, when even though $100,000 salary sounds like a pretty good salary. I have another question that says we've been recently seeing the California state legislators introduce legislation that would essentially allow build by right in commercial zones for multifamily residential projects. An example of that is SB 1379. What are some ways we can advocate for these bills to move out of committee to have flexible zoning in underutilized areas? And I think that's a great idea, because if a city wants to rezone like an infill, or the old commercial zones have huge parking lots that are very much underused, so we could put housing there. But for a city to have to completely do the studies and rezone could take forever, where this is something the state could be helpful on, and just pass the legislation that allows that to happen. But we have to make sure that it still supports the private sector building housing without a lot of labor restrictions. So that's the details of that bill. Anyone else have any thoughts on the idea of building in commercial zones?
Oh, I think it's a wonderful idea. And I think, you know, if you kind of drill down in some of these locations, it's been really interesting to see what's happened in some of these commercial locations, right? So you have commercial zones that might have even been, just clearly identified as industrial parks, right? Industrial zones. But when you really look at who the users are, it's not always something that's completely contrary to what you might think would be appropriate to, a neighborhood use, right? It's not always a chemically driven location or a business. Oftentimes you'll drill down, you'll see that there's childcare centers in these locations, that there's breweries in these locations, that there's bakeries and maker spaces in these locations. And there's one that comes to mind for me that I saw listed, and it's a great, locations near where the 5 and the 805 come together. And if you look into this, it's effectively, you can't see it from the rooftop, but you drill down into that and you see this is like almost a mini town center already. It has a church, a preschool, it has a brewery and a bakery and a post office, all right.
It's missing housing.
It's missing housing. It's missing housing, exactly. And it's right within a district that, has housing on the other side of open space. The back of it is right up against a trail system. So I think that was a great question. Absolutely appropriate to try and find solutions.
Yeah, how to do that. Sure.
The other part that is very obviously missing is the high density development next to transit lines. You take the transit from, let's say, La Jolla, take the blue line down to downtown, you would think you would see at most stops vertical construction, and there basically is none.
There should be. I mean, if you're going to have a transit stop, that's where you should have the highest density.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a big thing that I would agree with, because a lot of the lower income workers either share a car, can't afford a car. So if they have access to that public transit easily, it would make it much easier for them to get to work and get around.
So, okay, last question of the day is what do you see on the horizon that you are excited about regarding housing in our region? We're trying to end on a positive note. We're always crying about how difficult it is, but it is true. When the family moves in, we know we have success. So how do we create more of that success?
Well, I can jump in a couple of thoughts. I mean, sort of broadly speaking, it is really encouraging that it's finally part of a broader narrative on the public platform, right? So there was a lot of time where, it was just people within the industry that were talking about this, and there was still a ton of resistance. Not to say that there isn't, because I'm dealing with that front and center still in some locations. But I think that at least there's a better awareness of the need broadly for housing, and that you create the problems by pushing it away. I'm encouraged by the fact that some of our political leaders are finally sort of decoding some of this conversation, understanding when people, you've got community members that are standing up and saying, oh, no, we want to, preserve the community character, that they're recognizing that that's sort of, secret speech for, no growth proponents, and that it's not quite as simple as it sounds. It's not quite as lovely as it sounds. But there is a lot more in the way of discussion about adaptive reuse of some of these areas, about rezoning areas for people that you wouldn't expect it, right? People you run into at the grocery store, your friends' parent, the kids' parents, a different level of that conversation. And then there's some broader conversation about desperate need for things like student housing, multi-generational housing, some of the areas that we haven't concentrated enough in before. So that's happening. And I think that's really encouraging.
Certainly senior housing too. I think people are listening to the numbers that the population is the fastest growing population is those over 65. And I think it's actually those over 85, and the second fastest is those over 65. In the housing affordability is just such a constraint for seniors, and that's just going to be right in our face over the next several years. So, any other last thoughts from anyone? We solved all the world's problems for today. Then at least we have a better understanding of what the environment is here in San Diego County, and hopefully it helps you all make decisions about where your investments are going to be, how you're going to recruit people, recruit labor, figure out, what kind of houses we're building, where you're going to get your supply of labor and your materials and so forth. So call Eric so you can figure out how to provide the proper storage. And because actually that is a cost. If you have to store your materials, you have to take care of it, make sure it's ready. And so that's a challenge. In addition to all the other challenges that we have. All right, well, that's without any parting thoughts, we thank you. I thank all of the panelists and Alan, thank you for the great overview so that we could understand economics. It's always nice to have that information, and we need to get it even more often since things have changed so quickly lately. So, but thank you all for participating, and all of our guests. We had quite a crowd today, I think over 70 at one point. So hopefully we are all able to get what we needed from today's conversation. So thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone.